Welcome, everybody. I'm here today with Carl Johan Calleman, and I'm going to interview him about his latest book, Quantum Science of Psychedelics. And I have interviewed Carl a few times in the past, and the last time that I interviewed him was 3 years ago. And I remembered as we finalized our interview that I was sharing with him that I have a feeling that we will meet again. And it's 3 years now. It doesn't feel that long, but it's 3 years ago. And we talked back then about the 9 waves of creation. And that was a very fascinating interview, and I use that word a lot, fascinating, because I was very fascinated about everything that was shared. And welcome, Carl. I'm glad to have you here.
Thank you, Wilhelmina. I think the first interview you've made with me, I was probably in the Netherlands at that time, but that was also just a phone one. So it's first time that we get together and can see each other, and that's very nice.
Absolutely, yes. And I'm hoping everything is going well, because I see you now large in my screen, and I'm working on my phone because we just talked about it before we started the recording, that Zoom is kind of flaky right now because so many people are on it. So I'm hoping that everything is going well with the recording, and that they every now and then see my face too. But it doesn't really matter as long as they see your face. But
they'd rather see your face.
Well, I don't know.
I don't know. Okay.
But yes, let's get started. So for people that haven't heard of you yet, and I'm sure that is a small group, they can listen back to the recording that I just shared about, 3 years ago, because you gave a little bit of an introduction about yourself and how you got started, and how you got fascinated with the Mayan culture and the Mayan calendar, obviously. And started to do a lot of studies about that as well. It was really, I think you were in your graduate year, you said, and you took a vacation into Guatemala and Mexico. And if I remember correctly, that touched you really deep. Can you explain again a little bit, and maybe a little bit more information, why that touched you so deeply when you were there?
Yeah, well, I don't really know. I mean, I just stayed. I was backpacking for about 5 weeks, I think, and it really, meeting these peoples and seeing the old Mayan ruins, the big city of Teotihuacan, and all of Mexico, really, which is such a colorful culture, a very living culture. It just reminded me of something. It felt like it reminded me to something, and telling me that in some sense this is where I would belong. And but it wasn't like a one-time thing that changed everything. But I was quite, I came from this laboratory in Stockholm, which was very rational, and as Northern Europeans are, and then coming to this wild and colorful, wild I'm saying because I happened, unbeknownst to myself, to arrive in Mexico City on the Day of the Dead, and just ending up in a city where they had these skeletons hanging from the light poles and everything like that. It was not what I was used to. But then obviously there was also something that spoke to me more deeply, and I came out of it feeling that this is where the purpose of my life is really to be found here. That's all I can say.
That was a very profound experience, and for you, what you described, it was almost like you felt coming home, because you recognized different things.
That's right.
And so it really touched your soul, and that's and that's very fascinating, because as I was reading your book and was thinking about your life, you studied physical biology, And in your latest book, you describe various things, but I recognize that your background, the way where you started in your with your study, is all linking to your mission and all linking to all the discoveries that came afterwards. So I want to ask you one thing: how did you get to the choice of studying physical biology?
Um, uh, I was just, I was just looking for a job, basically, having completed my BS studies at the University of Stockholm, and I found one, and I was happy about that. But it really started as a chemist, you might say, and basically that is what my hands-on experience is. But it had a focus on cancer research, and so that's the reason it became physical biology. And in a sense, when I abandoned that career in 1993, 94, something like that, I never thought I would be using any of what I have learned before, these huge stacks of articles and stuff like that I have plowed through. But in this case, it is coming back.
Oh, yeah.
Because the whole issue of psychedelics, to get a grasp of how they work, you don't only need a very broad Mayan cosmology to understand how the universe works and why it is that the universe is multidimensional. It also requires, I would say, a knowledge of pharmacology and chemistry that ultimately comes back to, because in the final analysis, these are chemicals. And I mean, the psychedelic substances, they are chemicals.
Right.
And so how do they exert an effect? And how can that be, and most, I would say, most researchers, they would stay with that and think that this is a chemical effect on something going on in the brain. But then I happen to have this background in the Mayan cosmology, and could really been able to make a case that this is not just about something going on in my brain. It's about an altered relationship to the entire cosmos that is affected by one of these substances, one of these chemical substances that we call psychedelic.
Right. So I want to actually kind of rewind, but that's how I always work. I jump from one end to another, and it wasn't my intention to jump, to all the psychedelics and things like that yet, because I think it's very important first to emphasize the 9 waves of creations again, because it's the fundament of existence. And people that haven't heard it yet, I think it's important for them to learn a little bit about that first, so that they can understand everything else that we're going to talk about later. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you can you share a little bit about your discovery about the 9 waves of creations and the tree of life and everything?
Yeah, well, that's something I encountered already at my very first trip to Mexico that we just talked about in 1979, because I did go to the city, or the ancient city of Chichen Itza at that particular time. And, I was fortunate to be there before it had become this huge tourist attraction. And I could sneak in there in the night and see things for myself in a different way, because in those days there were, just a few people really, and now it's a couple of million people coming there every year. But to respond to your question, the central pyramid in Chichen Itza is devoted to, or dedicated to, the plumed serpent, as they call it. And this pyramid is built in 9 levels. And so are the major pyramids in the Mayan world. Whether you go to Tikal in Guatemala, to Palenque in Chiapas, or to Chichen Itza or Mayapan, you will find that these pyramids are built in 9 levels. And they are like 9 terraces. These are step pyramids. And there is a profound message in that I think a lot of people may miss. And this is that these pyramids are actually metaphors for the evolution of the cosmos. And so, you know, you might have seen a Hollywood movie of some Mayan priest or something like that. And if so, you would know that they would climb to the top of the pyramids. Mm-hmm. And what that means is that they would climb through 9 different levels, or as I expand on in this particular book, it would mean the climb through 9 different quantum states. So each of these levels represent a quantum state, and which translates, I would say, into a state of consciousness. So on these different levels, the human mind is not the same. And now, I'm not saying that that's exactly what happens when you climb one of these pyramids, but I am saying that this is what they wanted to create a metaphor for. And so then, you know, the next step, which makes the Maya very special, is to realize that each of these different quantum states is developed by a particular wave movement. And like in Chichen Itza, the central pyramid there is dedicated to the plumed serpent. And that's common for several of the pyramids in Mexico, in Teotihuacan, in Cholula, in others. They're dedicated to something called the plumed serpent. And which was almost like the primary creator deity of these peoples, and which was kind of enigmatic to me when I first came there and tried to approach the whole thing rationally. You know, right. why do you build a huge pyramid like that in honor of a snake? It didn't make sense to me, but you know, after a long time, I came to realize that this snake, or this serpent, actually was a metaphor for a cosmic wave movement. And right. And when you think about it, you know, if you don't have access to computers or so, and you want to create some kind of natural metaphor for a wave, a sine wave movement, the best you can come up with will always be a serpent. That's what that is. And not only the Maya would see serpents as creator gods. You know, in China, the dragons would be like serpentine dragons, entities in the spirit world, you might say. And you have them all over the world, really. I mean, the Aborigines in Australia, they talk about the rainbow serpent as having created their world. And as I was with the ayahuasca ceremonies in the Amazonas, I realized the tribes there, to them, the great anaconda was the creator of the human beings. Right. Now, that doesn't quite make sense to a rational mind, of course, but when you start to realize that each of these levels, each of these quantum states that life has passed through during its evolutionary course, that each of them was developed by a wave movement, a quantum wave, then you can start to understand that, yes, the creator, the very significant part of what has created ourselves are these wave movements. And the ancient peoples would use dragons and serpents and so forth in order to
symbolize that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. So these waves that you're talking about all started at a certain point in time, in different points in time. And you have that also in your book, the different dates, when the first wave started and what it created. It's really the basic manifestation of existence, more or less, right?
Yes.
And then that is an ongoing wave, and then at a certain point it was accompanied by the second wave.
Exactly.
And the second wave, can you describe a little bit what that represents?
Well, the second wave starts to develop the animals and the plants and the you know, the physical biology, you might say, of the various species on our planet. And so in this wave movements, you find that whenever a peak in the wave begins, there will be a burst of new species created. Then when it turns into a valley, it's not uncommon that it's the other way around, that there is an extinction of certain species, and then that will open up the space for new species to come in
So it's like death and rebirth happening with the wave as it goes. And then the third wave, when the third wave started, what's added to this evolution?
Yeah, well, with the third wave that started about 40 million years ago, then you begin an evolution to have these animals upright. And you know, especially then you might see this as an evolution from the monkeys to erect huge primates. So you know, the whole thing of creating a species that is erect, and bipedal, two-legged, as the Native Americans would say. That's a different kind of quality that it adds to it.
But it's a long time ago in our evolution. And the fourth, you know, I want to go to the first four really quickly. Not because it's not important, but because we have so much else to talk about. But the fourth wave.
The fourth wave started 2 million years ago, and it really brings human beings into existence. And so, to a large extent, it's all about having an increasing size of the brain, and which allows for a bigger cosmic resonance, I would say, compared to the lower animals. So that would be, you know, that's how we are created essentially by this fourth wave. And in that light, it's not very strange that the people in Amazonas say that the great anaconda created the human beings, because if you look at the great anaconda as just this huge wave of creation, well, that's what happened.
So symbolically it is, for sure. Yeah.
Yes.
So coming to the fifth wave, you know, you have listed also in your latest book an overview of the fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, and ninth wave. The ninth wave is where we're currently in, and started March 9th, 2011.
Yes.
But the fifth wave, you know, you describe it as the shamanistic state of unity. So
in lacking any better way of saying it, because we will never really know how these people experience reality.
Right.
But it makes something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
And the way we assume that those people thought and lived and existed, obviously, is what we found. You know, I read about the caves, you know, the cave paintings, and how you could more or less predict, you know, how their frame of mind was working, you know, because you described in the book about, you know, how in the period of the fifth wave, the cave paintings were far different than the cave paintings that was found in the sixth wave, because there was no sense of direction really, and there were no straight lines and things like that. Maybe you can share a little bit more about that, because I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, it is. But I think you said it exactly as I would have. So it seems like the people in the fifth wave, which was a creation wave, a serpent, if you like, that started about 100,000 years ago, it seems like they were living almost in a floating state, in a sense. And what we do know about them is that before the activation of this wave 100,000 years ago, we never find any symbolic representations. We don't see any art, and we don't have any evidence that these were spiritual people. Before 100,000 years ago, people might have been physically similar to us, but probably did not have a experience of being spiritual beings.
Because the mental evolution was not where we are today, obviously.
Yeah.
Yes, and you called this, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and but then around 100,000 years ago, you have the first evidence that yes, something happened, and you have the very oldest proof that the people were starting to make art from South Africa, where they have found these places where people made ochre, presumably to adorn their own bodies. And then you also do see that people, about 80,000 years ago, you have these places where people started to make burials, and they would leave flowers and so forth, meaning that they had a sense of an afterlife, and maybe we can assume that they felt that their spirit was something distinct from their body and that I could survive death. And so here's something new starts, and then when we come about 40,000 years ago, we do find these paintings, cave paintings, from some different parts of the world, notably Spain, France, but also from Indonesia and probably from Africa as well. And you get the feeling that they really capture the animals that they are portraying, but it's all very unstructured, you might say. Sometimes the horse is upside down, and it's just, you know, in all directions. And so maybe, or what I'm saying is that at that point, their mind had not been strictly geometrically compartmentalized as what happened 5,000 years ago when the sixth wave began.
Yes.
And what seems to have happened when 5,000 years ago, roughly, 3,115 BC would be the Mayan way of dating it, is that people started to download a new mind. And so that is very much out of sort of official science, or how most people would think about things. But you know, as the Maya saw it, the plumed serpent then created the human beings, it created life, it created civilization. And it did so because human beings are resonating with these plumed serpents and taking down through resonance with these waves, much like how we, you know, a television set may resonance with the microwaves that are coming in to produce a picture. So then the human mind completely changed, and it became structured, perpendicular, straight, dualistic, and all kinds of changes came with that. And it's based on that change in the mind that was a downloading that people then started to create civilization. And then you start to see these perfectly straight aligned pyramids coming out in Egypt, and all kinds of remarkable things. The cities.
That's all in the period of time of the sixth wave. That's the pyramids also started to rise and being created, I guess.
And when you think about these, what you read about these people 5,000 years ago, they seem to have been happy about this civilization coming. They were they were sensing that they were getting a new information from the cosmos. And they would thank the gods. Thank you for having given us writing, and thank you for giving us this or that.
Yeah.
And so it's not just a far-fetched idea. Something happened, and they tell us that something happened that they were grateful for. And certainly in this beginning, you know, they were happy about it.
Right. So you're talking about also in your latest book about how our brain, you know, doesn't create our mind, but our mind is something, you know, more or less from the outside that's cooperating with our brain and informing our brain. And with that said, you know, as you were sharing about the sixth wave, how people's mind were or how their interest and their understanding changed, and it has to do with, you know, the outer information, the outer influence that was being supported, you know, on whatever level you want to call it, to alter people's understanding of existence. And I think that's very fascinating to see it like that. I always say fascinating when I talk to you, because I think I have to start using a different word. But but it is truly fascinating to me, because I truly believe that our mind has nothing to do with our physical brain, you know, because of the downloads that we receive. And you know, the way I have functioned always was that, you know, I received information without even knowing that I received information, because that's not how I was raised. But I was asked something and I just went somewhere, you know, tuning into a different frequency and receiving the given. And that's what our mind is. That's the task of our mind, truly, you know, to translate the received. But we can only translate purely if we're not in our own ways, you know. That's a whole different story, but and we'll get to that later. But the seventh wave, you know, that came in 1755.
Yes.
CE, and atheism was something that started to bubble up, you know. People started to become rebellious against structures that were put down, and there was more or less a deliberate blindness for anything, you know, that could be there. What is the cause of that, do you think?
Well, each of these waves, they sort of carry a quantum state. And that's sort of it's a characteristic of quantum theory, that, you know, depending on the situation, depending on what you're studying, you can sometimes look upon it as a wave and sometimes as a quantum state. And but which in a sense is the same thing, but it helps to make the distinction in order to explain what is going on. And so the quantum states then, as I outline, especially in this most recent book, they depend on resonance with a cosmic duality. And so which shifts when these new waves are being activated. And then the fifth wave was just pure light, you might say, or the absence of any veils. And then came the sixth wave. It shifted 90 degrees, and it was only the left brain half that got the light, and the darkness fell on the right brain half. And that's, we can understand a lot of things from that particular shift in duality. And then came the seventh wave, and that basically gave a complete veil to the human perception of the spiritual, of the cosmic light, of the origin, the source, so to speak. And so as that happened, people shifted their approach to life considerably, and no longer were they interested in the Bible or whatever they might have been interested in previously, but instead they were became interested in the physical material reality of developing scientific technological methods of making use of that physical reality, and you know, actually without much consideration, interacting with the planet as if it was dead matter. And so, and there are good and bad sides to this whole thing. There's always good and bad sides to these things. But, you know, I think it's a fact to, when you study history, to see that at that particular time, there was a big decline in all the religions, and there was a movement, you know, quite obviously manifested in the United States of separating state and church, and that happens in France and several other European countries as well. And the reason was that people didn't want religion to be part of their governmental structures, so to speak.
Of their focus, yeah.
Yeah. So people, that was a change. And you know, material reality, production and consumption became the main focus during this seventh wave.
Right. So all these waves are have been and are moving across time, if you wish, simultaneously. You know, so that means also that certain people or certain beings have different influence, you know, or are adapting to different influence of these different waves. Okay, so you have always people that are and remaining religious, or there are always people that are and remaining atheists, you know, because of whoever they have chosen to be in this puzzle, or you know, whatever you want to call it, of life, you know. So when people are listening to this, they think, well, no, but there's, you know, I'm very religious and I've always been very religious, or I am this and I've always been this. We're talking about, when you explain about the 9 waves of creation, you know, it has to do with the pattern that it ignites into our existence, and the intent. No, it's not the intent, but it's the purpose that it has, you know, in the cycle of life, if you want to call it like that, right? Am I explaining that right? Because I just want to make people understand.
Absolutely.
You know,
Yeah.
The 8th wave, you know, came January 5th, 1999. And I think I spoke to you about it previously. I don't know for sure, but I assume, because 1999 was a year for me that I finally, truly started to work with the perceived, you know, because I was raised Catholic in the Netherlands, and, you know, it was just not something that was in my focus or in the understanding, you know, everything that I did and that I could do, you know, how to develop that. But in 1999, things started to shift for me, and I started to open up, and anyways, a lot of things shifted. But that's happens for a lot of people, obviously, because it was the 8th wave that was activated. And it's so cool to see it also, you know, in this understanding or this explanation, you know, why these all happened. Because the 8th wave represents New Age and neo shamanism. What do you understand about neo shamanism?
Well, I would just say in this context, I would just say the revival of the shamanistic tradition.
Okay.
I mean, neo-shamanism is well, I mean, it's something that has been introduced in the modern world, and notably by Michael Harner, who passed away quite recently, and and the reason he did that was that, you know, he had studied in the Amazonas, in Mexico, and I'm sure in many other places of the world. He'd studied shamanism, the ancient, the indigenous traditions that we call shamanism. But then he just felt that, you know, no modern person can become a part of these lineages that these indigenous people have. And then he felt, well, there is, even if whether they are in Mongolia or in Guatemala, there are certain aspects of their teachings that are very similar. And then he said, okay, let's make an eclectic mixture or just combine these in order to facilitate a re-emergence of shamanistic practices in the modern world. And then that's what has come to go by the name of neo-shamanism.
I see. Okay, so he was more or less the forefather to introduce this into unity, because shamanism, the way it was translated and seen, looked at before, was far from your bed. We call it in Dutch. Is literally translated. It's so far away from your own understanding, and it's something they do. Not that's something that I cannot do as well, because that's not for me. But as he brought it into the Western world, let's call it like that. He gave the translation and more or less the invite, to bring it into other people's heart as well, and understand that we all have those powers, but we just have to allow ourselves to see it and to accept it. That's what I assume, because I don't know him, but that's how it goes with me. I just talk. But
no, that's
correct
right.
me if I'm wrong. So,
and naturally he's been, there were criticisms from this tradition or that tradition, so to speak, saying that we are not the same as them and so forth. But
but that's ego related. They want
I think so.
They want to put themselves higher, or in a different place, because they don't want to be associated with any of that. But that has to do with the 8th wave, and that's all altering. And now that we are in the 9th wave, and the 9th wave started March 9th, 2011. And that was prior to the way, or the end of the Mayan calendar, at least, that was in September, or was it September or December? I forgot.
I would say October 2011.
Okay, October. Yes. But the 9th wave has to do with the individual connection to the divine. That's how you describe that. The individual connection to the divine. So.
Well, I think I, at this point, would like to change that description, even though I wrote it.
Okay.
I would rather at this point talk about it as a unified connection to the divine.
Yes, I'm with you. Yeah, I could feel what you were going to say, because it's about unification.
It is. It is.
It's very powerful, the times that we're in right now. Even yesterday evening, there was this global mass meditation that took place on this planet, and a lot of like-minded souls joined in and had the right intent to help balance and heal our planet, but also to help open up doorways, so a different down, let's call it a download, could come true, far beyond our universe, come into our universe. And it was an amazing experience. It's funny, though, that there's always groups of people that try to temper that, or try to take control of that. And that's something that I just want to highlight here, because I always believe that people just need to stay with their truth and feel what's right for them, not because somebody told them to do it or somebody told them to feel it. They have to truly start allowing themselves to be truthful to themselves, so that they can feel, what's right to do in the moment, but that's a completely different topic that I just jumped to, but that's how I'm like a grasshopper sometimes. But going back to your book, because the 9 waves I want to talk a little bit about, because of the fundament that it has of everything. But going back to your new book, it was very interesting. I read a little bit about the DNA and how the scientific translation, of DNA, that the Darwinism, neo-Darwinism, shared that excuse me, DNA doesn't carry the blueprint of life, you say, right? and
Yeah.
that was differently understood. And I believe by many other scientists still, they believe that DNA carries the blueprint of life.
Yeah.
And what started to change and shift, a few years ago, was people starting to talk about how DNA can change, how our DNA structure can change.
Mm-hmm.
And there's certain people that don't believe it, and other people that do. What can you share a little bit about of your understanding and your belief on that?
Yeah, well, it's a long history. If you look at the history of molecular biology, in the beginning, when the DNA molecule had been identified or as a carrier of genetic transmissions around 1950, it was for a long time the emphasis was completely on the stability and the immutability of DNA. And then, maybe the past 20 years or so, the interest have shifted to be on how, in certain ways, the DNA may change, so-called epigenetics is part of that story that has been more broadly disseminated, you might say. But I would go much further and say that it's a big illusion that our blueprints are created through the DNA. And one of the strong arguments that I show in this book is that practically all animals, whether you're talking about a human being or a small little nematode, which you sometimes find in the bathtub, these silvery fish that is called, which,
Okay.
by all standards are quite simple. All of them have the same number of genes in the DNA. And that doesn't make sense. You would think that if it's true that our blueprints come from the DNA or are encoded in the DNA, then we would have a million times more genes than a nematode. And so I make a couple of arguments there that this is not true. And it is starting to change. There was a scientific conference about 3 years ago where things started to open up, where scientists started to recognize that it's not DNA that creates the living cell, it's rather the living cell that creates its DNA. And what this, the work that we have touched upon it here, talking about the different waves that create the living organism. And what's important there is that the ultimate creator then is a wave, and that each one of us, the blueprint of our bodies, and then actually everything that goes with our bodies is actually created by an interference pattern of these different waves, the waves of creation, the 9 waves of creation, as the Maya would describe them. And then things changed considerably, because then you will start to look upon the blueprint as existing rather in an invisible quantum field, and the physical body that we have is just a manifestation of that blueprint, which is then it exists underneath the physical reality. And then everything changes in terms of who we are. Then, based on this theory, you can start to understand that the soul is, or the mind is not a creation of the body. It's something that's downloaded by the body. It's not the body is not that beginning point for everything else that we think or so forth. Suddenly, once you start to see that these blueprints exist in a invisible quantum field, you can start to realize that a lot of the kind of sort of spooky experiences people have with ghosts and aliens and God knows what, actually have a reality. They may not be real in the physical sense of it, but these entities, these beings of different kinds, may be very real in the quantum field.
Yes. No, I was telling a person, a young person, early, not that long ago, about, you know, like a ladybug, you know, is not aware of our presence there. You know, it lives its life, but it's not familiar with our presence. Same thing with us as human beings. You know, a lot of people are not aware of all the other beings that are around us in the different layers of existence. You know, and you know, I work with people and teaching them about multidimensional awareness. And it's something, you know, that you can only touch whenever you allow your frequency to go higher. I shared a story also about, you know, Bigfoot, you know, how they were searching for Bigfoot and how it was spotted, and then all of a sudden they don't see it anymore. And the reason why it was spotted, you know, is, you know, I always give that example, you know, whenever there's hunters in the forest, you know, they're sitting there waiting for their prey and they're zoning out, they're going into a meditative state. With that, they elevate their frequency, and pop, there is Bigfoot, or there is Sasquatch, if you, whatever you want to call it, you know. And then they step out of it, and they try to see, and they go back to the lower frequency, and of course you cannot see it anymore, you know. But anyways, and it's not important about proving this. It shouldn't be important about proving this. It should be just a common understanding. But where we are as human beings, it's not common. It's not a common understanding yet. But as the 9 wave is making its way through existence, and will continue to go to existence, as you shared before, a lot of things are shifting. You know, a lot of portals are opening up that allow different downloads. Like what I was just sharing to you about yesterday, the global mass meditation, and how this download came through, because it was time, you know. And it will help people get to a different mindset. But I want to go to ayahuasca, you know, a plant medicine. I work as a hypnotherapist, and I've never tried any ayahuasca or plant medicine or any drug, so if you want to call it like that. But I have worked with people, and they shared with me, you know, as I guide them through journeys, that they reach this depth that is so similar to what they experienced during the ayahuasca. And it's about truly allowing yourself to surrender to the moment with no self-restriction anymore, and just flowing to and through, you know, whatever needs to be bypassed to get to the core of your heart's intent. Anyways, you did share in your book that you went through that process and you used ayahuasca. Can you share a little bit about that and about your experience?
Well, I went to Peru, and where this is an honored tradition, so to speak, accepted by the government, and particularly in the proximity of the city of Iquitos, which is sort of probably the biggest Peruvian city in the Amazon region. And you know, I went through about a dozen of these kind of ceremonies, and well, you gather after nightfall, probably around 10 o'clock in the night, and you will be a group of maybe 10 or 12 people or so, and then there is a shaman or a couple of shamans that are holding the space, you would say, and it begins with every participant having a drink of this ayahuasca, which is made from certain trees and leaves that they find in the jungle there. And it tastes awful. It's really, it's hard to think of things that would taste worse. And and so there are unpleasant aspects of ayahuasca. And then you will sit down, having drunken this, you will sit down, and soon you will, not soon, but I think about after half an hour or 40 minutes, you will start to throw up. And so you will throw up, and then you will be in the new, after about 40 minutes, it's almost like a quantum shift that takes place, and you start to get completely different visions from the normal world. And of course, you have closed eyes, and mostly you would lie down, and it's just very, it's a whole variety of things that you may experience. And I think it's very, very individual what you will get. You know, the shamans will say that you will get what you need and not what you want, so to speak. And sometimes experiences have been just sort of very pleasant and full of light, but sometimes they're bizarre and inconceivable from a normal perception. And then finally, some people have had really bad experiences, or I should say negative experiences. It hasn't happened to me. But, you know, it's not, I don't think that's much different from in any therapeutic work where, you know, you will, if you go deep into something, you may encounter unpleasant things.
Yeah, all depending what you still need to cleanse or deal with in your life. You know,
yes.
Whatever conditioning or yeah, experience, trauma, if you wish, you know, that you still have to process. You know,
yes.
That's something that you will naturally encounter during the ayahuasca journeys. If that's what you're saying.
Yes, it is.
So
and then that goes on for about 4 hours, and then the shaman will sort of check you out, and you know, you come back to the normal reality because the active substance no longer is in your body.
System. Yes.
There is a difference, though. I mean, I think, as I elaborate on in this book, I argue that the experience of psychedelics is not something totally distinct from like hypnosis, holotropic breath work, or anything like that. It's a variation of a theme where different that in a sense, all of these practices will properly help to integrate your brain, and also create the contact with the cosmos more or less so. But there is a difference which makes psychedelics or ayahuasca or any other variety of it different, is that once you have that in your body, you can't just say, I don't like this. I'm going home.
There's no way back. Right. And you have to go through that procedure whenever you have made that decision, you know, and that's good for some people, you know.
Yeah. So
So were you happy after doing this, and did that more or less fulfill your expectations?
Well, yes, it has, you know, in significant regard, I think it's been beneficial, and it's fascinating. If nothing else, you use the word fascinating, but it's truly very, very fascinating, and it's sort of really unbelievable if you're coming from looking at this as the only reality that there is. You certainly get a big kick in the butt. There is that's not the case. There is so it really convinces you that there is what the shamans would talk about as a spirit world.
Right. Yes, a lot of people are drawn to using plant medicine nowadays,
Yes.
and it's growing and growing, and it's for a reason, I believe. It's for a reason that is coming into people's focus, because yes, you can use different tools to get to a really deep state of mind, or maybe not state of mind, a state of cosmos, if that's even a word.
Mm-hmm.
Um, to truly, connect with all that is, and allow yourself that freedom to surrender truly, but not everybody can do that. And
Mm-hmm.
this is a way to accelerate the connection, for people that are
Yeah.
still fighting, fighting and fighting. um, and that's why it's being brought into people's uh, vision, more or less, to start exploring with that, and moving forward, because where we're heading towards, um, the masses are actually now nowadays exposed to far more than that they would want to, you know um,
Yeah.
and I think that's a good thing. Of course, with technology, with the internet, and everything out there, people come across things that they would normally not come across. Um, but
Yeah.
there's also, as always, people hit rock bottom in whatever situation they have in life, and then they start their search and look outside of the box. And now it's easier to find other options to explore, and that's a good thing as well. But all those options are out there. If you translate it according to the nine waves again, of creations, it's out there because it's the normal sequence of existence. The way we translate it in our mind, the way we see the logic of it, is only our translation, but it's happening because it's meant to be. And that's
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and that's something that a lot of people not always can understand, or want to accept, that there is such a thing as meant to be.
Yeah.
People want to be in control of things and like to, yeah, be more or less empowered, or believe that they are empowered to manipulate anything.
Yeah.
And yes, we can manipulate a lot, but up to a certain point. At least that's what I believe.
Yeah.
Um, so the pineal gland, I want to talk a little bit about that, because
Mm-hmm.
as a subline you have pineal gland, multidimensional reality, and Mayan cosmology,
Mm-hmm.
if I say that correctly.
Yeah.
The pineal gland, that's something that everybody knows, or most people know. Um, it's more or less the connection, our psychic connection. Um, Whenever it's well developed, you have a strong connection with beyond. How do you describe that?
Yeah. Well, my view is that uh, as I said before, the Mayan calendar describes different quantum states, and
Mm-hmm.
those are different forms of mind that we download. But then somehow these and each of these minds actually have a geometry that sort of compartmentalizes the brain according to a particular geometry. And it's based on that we will think and perceive reality differently in different states of consciousness. The way I look upon the pineal gland is that it's the anchoring point for the mind that we download. And because the pineal gland is the only unpaired part of the human brain. And I then, since I look upon the human mind, the human brain, the human head as a microcosm of the planet, or it's a reflection of the planet, where there is a connection between then the pineal gland, which is at the center of our heads and which
Mm-hmm.
downloads the mind, really, that anchors the mind. That is then connected to the center of the earth. And then it's connected to the center of the galaxy and the center of the universe. And so it's it sort of is like a ladder to the heavens, as some shamanic people would talk about. And
So it's more or less the receiver and the transmitter?
well, it's, I would say, more of an anchoring point, but it's
Okay.
connected. I mean, one of the interesting things about the pineal gland is that it has crystals in it, calcite crystals. And, you know, outside of the ears, that's the only part of the human brain that has any crystals in it. And they're hexagonal. And what's interesting about that is that, you know, the center of the earth is also crystalline and has these kind of hexagonal crystals there. So I think there is a connection point here, that it's essentially the purpose is to be the anchoring point for the mind when the brain downloads that. But then, you know, what happens, for instance, if you take psychedelics, is that they will disengage the mind from the brain temporarily for whatever time period it is. And as that happens, or you can do a meditation that has the same effect of disengaging.
The mind to zero, yeah.
Yeah, and then as that happens, you know, the limits of the mind goes away, and that opens you up then, that, you know, you have these people in India and so forth that talk about enlightenment and the third eye seeing the light and so forth. That becomes understandable. So I don't think it's about activating the pineal gland. What it is to learn how to disengage the mind from its anchoring point in the pineal gland. And it's a different perspective, and it explains a lot of things when it comes to how we may perceive reality if you make that change.
Do you think
and besides, it does account for this whole chain of connections that there are between the, you know, the human brain and all the way to the cosmic center.
Yes. So as you were explaining that, do you think it's easier to facilitate the disconnect when your left and your right hemisphere is better in connection?
Well, I think, you know, we talked about a little bit earlier how different quantum state has had different degrees of duality and so forth. I think that if you're in a quantum state, if you're in a state of consciousness when there are veils blocking your experience or your contact with the divine, blocking your cosmic, then you will be barred from having these kind of experiences of enlightenment, because the veils will prevent that.
Yeah.
Now, if then you are doing some techniques, and psychedelics is one of them, in order to disengage this dualistic mind that you have downloaded, then you will be open to the cosmos, and, you know, you might have an experience of enlightenment or something like that.
Right. So the dualistic mind that we have downloaded, you know, throughout our existence, you know, that's what is more or less being restructured now to so that it can be a vessel to all that is. And when I look at myself, you know, I always, whenever I teach, I always give my own experience, my own life experience as an example. And also in this way, you know, as we are communicating about this, as I'm listening to you, I'm seeing myself in that picture as well. And for me, it's really easy to disengage from the mind, you know, and I just have to, you know, I just have the intent, so I take a breath and I recenter, and bam, it happens. Why does it happen so easily? Not because I'm so awesome, it happens so easily because it's something that I have done all of my life. That's how I came into this, existence. That was my task here. So I teach about simplicity, how we should embrace simplicity instead of complexity, and not seek for answers and ways to change and shift, to that place, but just allow to accept that you're already there. Because we are, and whenever we allow and whenever we start believing this, we will perceive that. You're talking about the veils that will shift and will go away. The veils are only there because we are keeping them there. We believe they are there. As soon as we allow ourselves to see that nothing is there, if we don't allow it to be, it's gone. Just like that. And I snap my fingers often, and I make a joke always, because I'm a hypnotherapist as well. It's not, to put you in hypnosis. It's just, it really can go this fast, and it's really that simple. But psychedelics for sure help, facilitate that within people that haven't had it all their lives, And there's other tools too, to clear ways like sound. I use my voice. I connect with the angelic realm, and they share with me what tones I need to bring forward, high, low, and whatever. Sometimes they want me to go higher than I think I can, but you have to just let go then and just go with it. But sounds, and you wrote also in your book about sounds, that's one of the tools, like drumming, and I share about the voice, but there's many other sounds, that can be brought forward, that can break barriers, that we have allowed to create around us, around in our energy field even, and that needs to be broken, and it can be broken by things that are not necessarily explainable by our rational mind, but as long as we trust, and feel that there's no limitation, we can get to places and depths unheard of, so I'm not even asking you something, I'm just talking again.
That's fine. That's good. So it's like you already have for whatever reason, you have a channel, I think, that to the Cosmic Center, and not everyone does, and others might, to different degrees, will use different techniques and practices, and but some people would just have it. I think.
Bless you. Yes, and that's the thing, we will all get there in our own ways, and we will encounter the people that we need to encounter to help us on our way, as long as we are not, self-limiting ourselves, and allowing ourselves to be completely free to explore and integrate and manifest, let me see, is there anything else that I had here that I want to talk to you about in your book? Well, multidimensional reality, we kind of touched a little bit, this is also a very important aspect in our consciousness that is going to shift, and that is shifting with many, many people. With me, my multidimensional first experience was in 2007, and back in that time, it was barely talked about. That word was not, I couldn't even find it in the beginning.
No.
Anyway, but nowadays it's everywhere, and that's because of the wave that has made its progress.
Right.
So
very much so.
How do you see the multidimensional reality expanding in the coming year?
Well, I would say, the multidimensional reality, as I look upon it, like a stacking of different quantum states, or stacking of different states of consciousness. And then we're all a little bit different, because some of us may primarily be on the 6th level, others on the 8th level, finally some moving their way towards the 9th level. But these nine quantum states, they're sort of stacked and they exist together. They exist in parallel. And it's based on that reality can be experienced in a multi-dimensional way. But in practice, in our normal state of consciousness, the one we are in now and here, we will probably be dominated by one of these particular waves, even if we may sort of alternate or combine or all that kind of stuff. I think, there is a strong background to what's happening in the world today, which is really that one of these waves, one of these quantum states, which is the 6th level, which is the, you might say the one that created the patriarchal civilizations 5,000 years ago, that is now turning into down into a valley, into a dark age, you might say. And so I do believe that in terms of our physical reality, our physical world, things will be very difficult in the next 2 years at the very least. But the way out of that, as I always emphasize, is then really to develop a resonance with the higher waves, especially the 9th wave. And that's something I think everyone should do. And part of what I emphasize in this book then is that psychedelics is one of those tools that through the temporary experience you may have of disengaging your limiting mind, you will at least temporarily have a cosmic experience that is of unity with the cosmos. And that is really then what the 9th wave brings. And similarly, just to follow the ups and downs of the 9th wave as it proceeds, will tell you a little bit about what kind of effect this wave has on you. Mm-hmm. And this is important because it's the highest wave. It's sort of where all of the universe is meant to go. And it's meant to transform ourselves into people that are loving, people that are perceiving all other creatures as in unity, mm-hmm. all life in unity. It means not to create distinctions, dualities, or even rejecting some aspects of reality, some people, some aspects of nature, and so forth.
Right.
So it's about bringing back the unity consciousness, and the 9th wave allows that. That's really what the universe wants, where the universe wants us to go. And so I can just emphasize that. At the same time, if you're asking what will happen in the world, I think it will be difficult.
Yes. So are we in the lows right now, in the valley of the wave?
Yeah, the 6th wave is just starting to go down, and
okay.
It's a very long-term process. And,
how long does that normally take?
Oh, this is 400 years.
Oh, okay.
So it's a big shift, a big transformation of human civilization that is taking place, because the 6th wave is the one that created civilization, and then it's created civilizations up and down like this, and the new ones have followed up on the others, and when the others have been destroyed and new ones have come, and so forth. It's a never-ending story, you might say. And
so now with the coronavirus, blasting this planet, it's
yeah.
I feel that it's just starting, but I'm hoping not. But I have a feeling that it's just starting. And is that something that you can also see in the different waves that are forming and the translation of that?
I would say that ever since the shift in 2011, the people have come to experience reality, including the political reality, as unprecedented. Mm-hmm. this has been an unprecedented use of the word unprecedented. And this, it started with the political world, but now it goes into the health world, where we don't recognize reality as it used to be. And that's because we are in a different quantum state once after the shift took place in the sixth wave. So it's not the same reality. And then, like I lived 60 years in that previous state, and then I don't recognize myself because there's been a cosmic quantum shift. And that is what's I think also is scary, because you mentioned this coronavirus, but there is a fear associated with it that is hypnotic, to use that word. As far as I don't take any unnecessary risks, but or challenge fate or anything like that. But I do think that the fear around it has grown completely out of proportion. 60,000 people have died in the world out of 60 million people that normally die in a year. And then out of 8 billion people that we have almost on our planet. And then for some reason, this has become this huge, all-changing thing. And I would say that the real all-changing thing is not really the virus itself. It is this shift in consciousness that is taking place. We need to navigate that in a wise way and see the real proportions of it.
Well, we also see, a lot of good things coming out of this. A lot of people are unifying themselves and helping others that they normally wouldn't, and their heart is opening up, and their empathy is growing. It almost seems like, maybe that's why this fear needed to be fueled by our media and the society to bring people to this point, and it's not, that wasn't their intention, that wasn't the media's intention, but it's all in the right order of developing and evolving, because every how do you call that, every experience has a consequence, and every choice has a consequence, So wherever this will lead to, will be for the benefit of humanity, I know, but it can take a little bit longer in our mind, because the people that are aware see that it can be done differently as well, like yourself, the fear is not needed. I always say, be aware, and don't have fear, but be aware, and that's, you have to be careful because of what's out there. But you have to just follow your heart and know what is right to do and where is right to go, But I noticed that we have been talking far longer than an hour, and I can talk forever with you, teams, So I don't want to hold you up too much. But let's just finalize this, because I don't want to take all your time here. Is there anything that you want to leave us with?
Well, I want to leave you with reading my books. And I don't, I mean that quite seriously, because they present something that you don't find anywhere else. And especially if you want to understand the true meaning of the Mayan calendar system, I would say that's the only place you can go. And I want to emphasize also that there's been a lot of misrepresentation of this system, and that we may suffer from that misrepresentation by earlier writers, I would even say. So of course I want to emphasize that, and this is a book, I should say, that is for those that want to primarily understand how psychedelics work. I mean, there are many books about the experience of psychedelics and how ancient peoples used them and so forth. But this, I think, is unique in explaining exactly how they work. But it's also unique in the sense that it connects this with the cosmic plan, so that the use of psychedelics, or I should say any of other mind-altering techniques, is actually part of the cosmic plan and the alignment with the ninth way, which is a critical aspect of reality or our path at the current time. So you find these books anywhere where they sell books, including at Amazon and Barnes and Nobles and so forth. And
Right.
I hope you enjoy them.
Yes, I would recommend for people that haven't read the Nine Waves of Creations to also get that, even though you kind of highlight certain things in this book as well, but this goes far more in depth. And yeah, it's for sure a very a book that I recommend, especially in these times. People are home and they have time to go into silence and understand different facets of themselves, and also you know, as you described in this book, for people that are very analytical, they can see the logic of things, and whenever people understand the logic of things, it's easier to allow themselves to implement this. You know, so I think it's priceless. It's something that anybody that is either just starting to explore or has been exploring for a long time to read and to come to and to reflect upon their own feelings and situation. Last time we spoke, it was 2 years ago, I asked you, do you have any other books in the making? And you were kind of sharing a little bit about this book, that you had some information, but you were still really focusing on the nine waves, you know, because you had so much that needed to be done with that. But here we are with Quantum Science of Psychedelics. I see, I've talked to you over, I didn't even know when we first started. I think it was 2008 we had our first interview, I believe. And I see that you changed a lot. Your understanding of things shifted, and your approach towards things shifted, you know, in a good way, in a very good way. And you have, I see you now far more as a person that's that has let go of certain ideas and beliefs, and you're just open now, you know, open to receive whatever is next, and that's awesome.
Okay, good.
But no judgment here. I'm just sharing you how I perceive. And I think it's good, you know, to be the example like you are, you know, and also, you know, there's in the world where we are living, you know, a lot of people that are in the awakening process are mostly women. You know, if you look around, and if it's 80%, especially here in the United States. In Holland, it's a little bit more men that you see also. You know, in that mode of change. How is it in Sweden? Do you still
it's
go
been
there?
a while. It's been a while since I mean, I keep up contacts, but it's been a while since I was there and taught, so I couldn't really tell too much. I would suspect it's more equal than here in terms of numbers of the gender.
Same thing, yes. And I'm not sure what the reason is, but it doesn't really matter. It's good for you though to bring out these books, because that will attract another group of people, you know, that more or less need that confirmation and need that deeper understanding of things. So I have to stop talking because otherwise there's another half hour coming. But I want to thank you for all your time and sharing your
thank
wisdom.
You, Wilhelmina.
And until we meet again. Okay?
Until we meet again.
Much love. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Much love.
Bye-bye.